Soho Dragon webinar on adding Visio visuals to Power BI reports. So I've met Scott numerous times and worked with Scott. He's a great presenter. He's also a fellow Microsoft MVP in the Visio world. So Scott, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you.
Good. How many Visio MVPs are there in the world?
There are 6 of us.
Right. Okay. Steady on. All right. Okay.
I happen to be it in the Americas, North and South. Most of the rest are in various places in Europe.
Right. Okay. So we've actually got 2 others working on another project. So basically, Soho has 50% of the Visio MVPs. I'm actually Business Apps Teams MVP on this. So we're just going to just sort of a few logistics here. If you've got, well, everyone will be on mute. If you've got any questions, fill them through the Q&A on that, and I will fill those to actually Scott. So just very quickly, do people in the chat, do people just want to say where they're, what city they're located in? I'm actually in New York City.
And I'm north of Boston, town of Andover.
Who is the furthest person? Okay, Ali, you're in Lexington, Kentucky. Okay, Jeffrey, who are you? Okay, we've got a few people typing. East Tennessee. Pittsburgh, Canada, interesting. Calgary, okay, even though Calgary is Canada, I'm not sure if that's further than Tennessee.
Oh, yes.
MA, Massachusetts.
Peter, let me just tell you, Calgary, Alberta is definitely farther than Tennessee.
Is that the west coast of Canada, is it?
It's not the west coast, it's in the plains.
Right, okay.
And the Rocky Mountains.
Right. I'm assuming you're not doing any geography mapping on this Visio.
Yeah.
Okay.
I usually do.
Okay.
Any chance I get.
We have Toronto. Okay. Is there anyone actually in Europe, actually? Because we normally do this time slot here, particularly so we can hit the Americas and Europe as well on that. Okay. We've got Toronto and Boston on all of this. Right. Okay. So we've done the geography. So if you've got questions, Brazil. That is definitely the furthest. Okay. On that. I don't even know what hello is in Portuguese. Scott, do you know what hello is in Portuguese?
My nephew does. His wife is Portuguese. I don't.
Right. Okay. All right, then. So that's me just generally warming up and just getting people welcomed in. People do start a few minutes late on this. So, Scott, do you just want to perhaps introduce yourself and just explain that Visio? How long have you been working with Visio, by the way?
20 years or so.
Okay.
My interest in Visio began from a different angle. It wasn't because I needed to learn about Visio per se, but a lot of the work that my business partner and I have done over the last 26 or 7 years is business process mapping. So it's about helping organizations to define their processes, map them, and either map current state processes, that's usually the starting point, and then look at those processes and figure out how can we do things more effectively. And so we help design future state processes. In the course of doing that, we never found a good way to create content-rich process maps that really told a story rather than just had boxes and arrows. So we ended up creating an add-in for Visio, and I've got one slide that has the name of it. It's called Task Map. We ended up creating this add-in for Visio, and in the course of being the lead tech guy, in a sense, and designing the add-in, I ended up needing to learn a lot about Visio. So I started answering questions online and doing those kinds of things that triggered somebody at Microsoft to say, "Hey, we think you're an MVP for Visio." So that was sort of a roundabout story, but that's how I got to Visio.
All right, very, very cool on that front. All right, so I actually witnessed Visio actually about 30 years ago in the US Embassy in London, when it obviously wasn't owned by Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And the embassies were doing, US embassies are pretty good overseas for promoting US big companies. And they had like a tech exhibition and a Visio, and I bought like the floppy disks of like the 4 Visio things with the shapes and everything. And it was brilliant. It was so much better than Harvey graphics that we were using at the time. Mm-hmm. On that front. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to just jump in?
I'm ready.
All right. Okie dokie.
Good. Well, thank you, Peter. I'm excited to share a few ideas, and I would love to have this conversation work both ways. Please do ask questions in the chat. Peter's going to be monitoring that for me. I'd love to answer your questions as we go along. I'll try to leave a few minutes at the end for questions as well. What I want to talk about today is something that if you have used Visio, you might not know about. If you've used Power BI, you still might not know about this thing because it's a way to add exactly what the title on the screen says. It's a way to add a Visio diagram into a Power BI report. And I love that because it allows me to add visual context to a bunch of data. Now, Power BI is pretty visual by itself. You get all kinds of cool slicers and dicers and graphs and charts and all that good stuff. But often that data exists in isolation. And what I love about this Visio visual, and what you'll see in a couple of minutes, is the visual context that a diagram embedded in the report can add. So what I'm going to show you today is based on an actual customer project. With agreement with the customer, I'm able to show this, but not name them. So you'll have to try to guess who this particular company might be. I'll give you a hint. They run theme parks, and the examples I'm going to show you involve theme parks. So you might guess. I can't control that, but I will do my best not to say the name. So quick aside, I will be giving away an ebook version of my last book about Visio, which, despite being published in 2016, still is relevant for the desktop versions of Visio. And I'm also going to give away a license for that task map add-in, the process mapping add-in that I mentioned a moment ago. This QR code I will repeat again later, but this will take you to a page on the task map website where you can fill out a form, pick today's presentation. That will do two things for you. It will give you a copy of a PDF copy of my slides that I'm using today, and it will also enter you in the contest. And I'm delaying drawing the winner until the end of next week in case people watch after the fact. So feel free to enter. And yes, that will put you on my mailing list, but I promise I don't send emails out all that often, so you will not be bombarded by anything, and you can always unsubscribe if you choose. So what were the two issues that this client hired me to work with them about? The first was about downtime and equipment repair throughout theme parks. Now, imagine that you run a theme park. There's a lot of geography involved. There are a lot of buildings, and we'll talk more about some of the challenges that involved. The second scenario is one that involves managing the resort hotels and improving customer service in the resort hotels that this company runs. And I'll wrap up with some links to resources that are available to you, as well as answer any final questions that remain at that point. But as I've already commented, don't wait till the very end to ask questions. If something I say triggers a question for you, put it in the chat. Peter will let me know, and we'll take care of it. This is brief background about me. I won't bother to say much about it other than there it is. And if you download the slides, you'll have this information and the hyperlinks that are on the slide. Oh, I should mention the QR code. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn, that's what that QR code is. I will provide that QR code again a little bit later toward the end of the presentation as well. So on to the meat of the subject. So what is it that these guys, the theme park operations company, said to me? Well, the first challenge they presented me with was, we have a bunch of folks who go out into the theme parks, and they are tasked with finding and repairing or replacing equipment. Sometimes it's network technicians, people who handle video gear, people who maintain the computers that make the rides operate, whole range of different kinds of equipment. And most of it is tucked in closets in various buildings all around the parks. A picture, two issues. Number one, some of these parks are pretty big, anywhere from dozens of acres to several hundred acres in the case of some of the larger parks. And number two, part of the second challenge is that the folks who do the repair and replacement of this equipment usually don't work for this company. They work for a third party. So they're contractors who may or may not have ever been in a particular theme park. And even if they have been in the theme park, it was probably as a guest, not. So they don't even know where half the buildings in the park are, because many of them are what this company refers to as backstage, not the things you and I as guests have the luxury of seeing. So the challenge then is, how do we allow these people to go out and get into the parks and solve problems more easily? And requirement, specific requirement, was we want whatever is produced to be viewable on a tablet or a phone so that these folks, when they're in the parks, can navigate more effectively. We concentrated on finding the buildings. The challenge of finding the right closet inside the building is a little bit different story, but it's all about getting to the right place. So picture that you're a technician, you're faced with a park, and you need to get to the right place. So what did we do? We started with collecting whatever we could find. They gave me some maps. Some of them were a few years old. I looked at that and said, you know, this part of the park, they told me, has changed. So what can I do? Well, I went to Air Photos. I went to Google Photos, Bing Photos. So it was a combination of those two things. And then I used a capability in Visio called background pages. And if you know Visio background pages, you'll know exactly what I'm saying. But picture that a background page, you can put shapes, you can put stuff on it. You can attach that background page to a foreground page. And in effect, the background stuff appears on the foreground page, but you can't touch it or change it. The foreground page, you can do whatever you want. Now, for those of us of a certain age who might in our childhoods have used something called tracing paper, this is actually very much the same idea, because we had something we wanted to make a copy of. And, copy machines, what was that? So you put this thin gauzy paper over the top, and anything you drew on the paper you were copying what was underneath it. You pulled some things that you wanted, you left other things behind. That's exactly what I did in Visio. So yes, this was some tedious hand work initially in order to stitch together the right amount of things to get what we needed. So I would draw the canals and trace the parks and the parts of the parks that were fixed, like paths and roads and so forth. And then I added the buildings, traced the buildings so I could know where the 337 buildings in the park I'm about to show you were located. And then take away the background page, and I'm left with the traced parts of what I need from that background collection of stuff. So what was I looking at? I was looking at something like this, an old map, 5 years old, of one particular park. And I supplemented it with, a Google photo or a Bing photo. But what I really ended up needing to do was create a mosaic, a combination. So the square that's here, the square that's right here is actually a section of the park that was completely raised and rebuilt for a new attraction in the time since the original map was created. So that was sort of how I got started. It was a combination of some maps, some photos, and a bit of tracing. And I ended up creating something like this. So here's the map at the point where I had all the physical stuff, the ground, the rivers, roads, and so forth. Then I added the buildings, as I mentioned. And then the really interesting part of the work began, because all of this was preparatory to being able to deal with data and help technicians find what they needed. So what did we do next? We assigned an ID to every building. We linked each building linked a diagram to a data source so that each building was linked to information about what was contained within. So which kinds of equipment, how much, and so forth. Then we created some ways to visualize that data on the map, basically by turning buildings different colors that meant different things. We added a legend so we'd all remember what the colors actually meant. And then along the way, I ended up writing some Visual Basic code in order to automate some of the repetitious functions. Saved a huge amount of time by being able to do that in order to not have to redo certain things over and over and over. The end result was something like this. Now, I didn't mention this before, but I will now. This first solution doesn't actually involve Power BI. This is a pure Visio, 100% Visio solution. So that's just an image of the map. Let me show you the actual result. I'm going to switch over to my browser here. And this is a park map. This park has 337 buildings in it. It stretches over several hundreds of acres. And picture that you're a technician. And let's zoom in here and go down to this part of the map. So this is a Visio diagram viewed in a web browser. And one of the really nice things that Microsoft did 5 or 6 years ago with Visio is to allow you to store a Visio diagram in either OneDrive or SharePoint Online. And the simple act of doing that, no conversion, no preparation, no nothing, just save the diagram in either of those two locations, allows anyone with a web browser to view the diagram. So I happen to be using Chrome on my PC. This looks exactly the same in Safari on a Mac. It met the requirement for tablets or phones because it looks just the same on any device that you happen to have. So a web browser, any device, works fine. So I'm now Joe Technician. I park in the parking lot here. These are the entrance booths right here. Let me zoom in a little bit further. So these are the ticket booths right here. So I walk in through the park, flash my badge. I know where the roads are, the trails. You know, we can see this dot dash line around the outside. Those are roads. The green dash lines are trails. This looks like a train, and in fact is. This might be, oh, let's just say a safari ride sort of thing in this park, and then some more buildings up here. Now, I'm going to focus on the top corner here because this is where I've put some sample data specifically to allow me to light up buildings and show you what the legend looks like. So these are all the different kinds of equipment here: security, entertainment, network, and so forth. And the idea is a building should be lit up based on what's inside it. If a building has more than one type of equipment, then we have a color for that. There's multiple types color here. So you see this sort of teal color on these two buildings. Other buildings happen to have just one kind of equipment, so they carry a color for that type of equipment. So the good news is, if I'm back to being Joe Tech and I'm going out and I'm looking for security equipment, I can ignore any building that isn't either this light color blue for security only, or the ones that are multiple, that the teal color that have multiple types of equipment. But you know what? It's kind of annoying to have to say, okay, now how do I know what's in this building without going in it? So what we did was we made a duplicate copy of this map right in the same diagram here, one tab or one page for each type of equipment. So this is the security view of the map. Only buildings that light up are the ones that have security equipment. So you see two light blue buildings here. Same way with entertainment equipment or network equipment or attraction equipment and that sort of thing. So you get the idea here. Quick aside, again, this is pure Visio. This is nothing but Visio in a browser, but each of these buildings has in it a couple of formulas to make the building smart. And the way that this page works, or any of these pages work, is the formula in the building looks at the name of the page. So it says, okay, I'm the building, I'm on the page called network. So if that's the case, only turn on the color for buildings that have network equipment. Whereas back on the general page, we said, okay, this is not a page that has exactly only one kind of equipment, so turn on all the colors so we can see the whole picture. So again, make it easy for the user, the tech walking around looking at this map on an iPad, tap on the equipment page for security, and that's all that they see. They know which buildings to ignore, which buildings to go to. I hope that gives you some interesting ideas. This happens to be a theme park. I'm just going to make the wild guess that most of you don't manage theme parks for a living, but use the same ideas here to think about floor plans or organization charts even. You're not navigating and walking around trying to find somebody in an organization chart, but on the other hand, you can add colors or add icons to an organization chart in Visio, or a network diagram, or any other kind of Visio diagram, in order to light it up in various colors and with icons to represent the data underlying the diagram. So for me, data is Visio's superpower. It's the thing that many people who are even longtime Visio users don't know much about. But the fact that I can have data inside shapes in a diagram and visualize that data in several dozen different ways, and even better, I can link the diagram to an external data source. So as the external data changes, the graphics in the diagram change too. That's really powerful stuff. And that's what this example represents. Where we're going to go next is to take that to the next level by incorporating a diagram like this into Power BI. But let me just pause for a second. Peter, any questions in the chat yet?
There was almost like saying, are you doing geo mapping on this? Is that coming up?
Excellent question. And you know that we talked about, the client and I talked about this a lot when I first started the project, because obviously GPS is everywhere these days. We could equip these technicians with the ability to use the GPS in their phones to navigate around the park. We opted not to do that. They were looking for something a little bit simpler, and that's why creating these maps in Visio was the thing that we decided to do. There are other parts of this company that use various geographic information systems, some of which I suspect some of you might have used as well, ArcGIS and so forth. So there were other people in other parts of this company using GIS systems, but this particular application for this particular team, they decided not to do that. For one thing, those GIS licenses are considerably more expensive than a Visio license or two. And even better, I didn't say this yet, but when you create a map and put it into, or a Visio diagram of any kind, and put it into OneDrive or SharePoint, and someone views it in a browser, they don't even need a license to do that. So we could create these maps, store them in SharePoint, and anyone with a browser had access, and access rights to the file, of course. But anyone with a browser, like the technicians wandering around the parks, did not need a license. That's not the case generally with GIS solutions.
So there's another question. Can you show the shape data for one or two multiple types? That was from Jeff.
In this case, I don't have the diagram open right now, and rather than take the time, basically what we have in the, I believe it was an Excel file behind this diagram, what we have in Excel is a building identifier, an equipment type, and then a quantity. So with multiple cells in multiple rows in Excel that were mapped into a single building based on the building ID. And then the formulas inside the shapes, the formulas that we designed and put inside each of these building shapes, parse that data. And so the data moves from Excel into the shape data fields in each building shape, and then the formula interprets what's in the shape data fields. So not exactly what you're looking for. My email address will be at the end of this, in the slides toward the end. Feel free to contact me afterwards if you'd like more details. Anything else?
There's a slight follow-up to that one, and that was, so you built the formula directly onto the Visio shape.
Yes. One of the irrespective of data for the moment, one of the really powerful features of Visio in general is the ability to make smart shape, a shape that has logic built into the shape. And this is not separate VBA programming or anything like that. These are formula that you can build into something called the shape sheet that is behind every shape in Visio. Those formula can do all kinds of things. So I can have a shape, for example, that determines where it is on the page. I'm just making up a trivial example. If this shape is right of the center line, it's red. If it's left of the center line, it's green. I can have a shape that changes color or size or position on the page based on data values when we introduce data. In this case, there's nothing like that happening, but the shapes are smart enough to understand enough about the data that we connected them to and be able to turn that into the appropriate color based on the circumstance.
Okay, I hope that answered the question.
All right, excellent. Well, keep the questions coming. I like to make sure that what you walk away with is some good ideas about how you might be able to apply some of this to what you're doing. And again, you're not managing theme parks probably, but look for the parallels. All right, back to the slides for a moment. So let's now talk about the second challenge that they presented to me. They said, we have housekeepers and housekeeping supervisors who maintain resort hotels. We also have engineers who support the hotels, provide fixes for air conditioning and whatever else. When things break, they need somebody to take care of it. So the target audience for this particular problem was the housekeeping supervisors and the engineers and engineering supervisors who are responsible for maintaining resort hotels. They do a great job already. And if any of you have stayed in hotels on the resorts that are run by this company, you would know that they generally do a really, really fine job at guest service, customer service. But always looking to be better, they said, is there a way that we can get more closer to real-time data into the hands of the engineers and the supervisors, the housekeeping supervisors? And when I say into the hands, the specific requirement was, oh, by the way, we've already equipped these folks with a Surface Pro. So they had the little form factor, the case for a Surface Pro that allows them to hold it in one hand and tap on it with the other hand. So using it like a tablet, they had already equipped these folks with Surface Pros to use as tablets for several other applications. So our challenge then was pretty straightforward, really, because obviously a Surface Pro can run a browser, any one of several. And if we have a browser, then we have access to Power BI, published Power BI reports and Visio diagrams. So that was the challenge. Let's do an even better job of providing customer service. In this case, much like the pure Visio solution a moment ago, which happened to be maps of the parks, we needed to create floor plans of the hotels. Now you're going to sit there and say, well, they already have floor plans for these hotels. They built the hotels, didn't they? Well, yes. But once again, the maps we needed, the floor plans we needed, were not engineering level. We don't expect anybody to build a hotel from the floor plans that we're going to create. What we need really is only that each guest room in the hotel on any given floor be individually addressable, just like the buildings were in the park map, so that we can associate each room with data. So my challenge was gather what there was that already existed about the various floors in the dozens of hotels across these parks. And guess what? I did exactly the same thing. I used that tracing paper concept. So I built the floor plans using Visio floor plans. The floor plans have been available as a capability in Visio almost since the beginning, almost as long ago as Peter started using Visio, I think. So I was able to use the floor plan templates in Visio to create custom floor plans for these resort hotels. And I did that then, put it on a background page, and then on the foreground page, I used just the parts of the floor plans that I needed. That allowed me, the Visio side of it allowed me to create shapes for individual rooms. And when you think about any one hotel, the rooms tend to be somewhat similar, although when you get into it, you'd be amazed how many varieties there are. There's the same rectangular room, except the door is in the top left, or it's on the top right, or the door faces the hallway, or the door faces the outside of the building with an outside walkway, or the bathroom is on the front left, or the bathroom's on the front right, the bathroom's in the, you get the idea. So even simple within one hotel tends to be a little bit more complex than you'd like. And then, of course, you move to the next hotel and it's completely different. So I needed to be able to create room shapes. I needed to organize those room shapes into blocks, because the good news is that the blocks of rooms tend to repeat from floor to floor. So you may have a block that consists of rooms with a door on the left next to a room with a door on the right, left, right, and so forth. But that block of rooms I could reuse. So I didn't have to do every floor individually, which was nice. Then, drop those rooms that I created, the floor plans that I created onto the background pages and figure out what I needed from where, remove the background page, and we're pretty much good to go. So like with the park map, let me go back to the source materials. What did I have to work with? Well, in some cases, I had pretty basic, here's the floor, here are the rooms. You can see where the doors are, and you see the 2 digits of the room number, and the 2 digits that you don't see are related to the floor this room is on, but this pattern repeats through this hotel. And in other cases, I had full-scale engineering level diagrams to work with. So it depended on the building, depended on what they had available for me. But I took the best of everything I could find, And for any given hotel, then I was able to create in Visio an outline of the floor. That's just a simple black line that shows the outside of the building, the shell of the building, if you will, and then what the blocks of rooms look like on each of those floors. And do this for each of the hotels, and then we're pretty much good to go. We're now ready for the data. Good news is rooms already have numbers, so there was no question about how do we number these rooms. We just used the room numbers that existed. We linked that to a data source, and I'll talk more about the data source in just a second. Created a Power BI report that allowed us to slice and dice the data in various ways, drop that Visio visual into the Power BI report, and once again, there was a bunch of VBA code to eliminate a lot of repetitious activity. The end version of what we created was heavily dependent on the data. So I'm going to give you two views of the data. The first is data that I created for our convenience as a team working on this. That involves setting up an Excel workbook. No rocket science here, but I had a tab that had a list of all the parks. And then each park contains multiple resorts. So the second tab was all of resorts associated with the parks. And we're just going down through the hierarchy here. Each resort has multiple hotels. Each hotel has either one building in some cases, but there are multiple hotels that have 4 or 5 buildings in a cluster run as a single hotel. Each hotel has multiple floors. And now we're getting down to the real nitty gritty because the final tab here is the one that has all of the rooms on every floor, in every building, in every hotel, you get the idea. So there was a bit of manual labor involved here in consolidating all of the data they gave me into a usable form like this, a whole lot of Excel formulas because I'm a lazy guy and I like to let software do the work for me wherever I can. So that was one data source, was this structure of getting from a park down to an individual room. The second data source is my all-time favorite name for a data source. When I first got involved with this company, they kept talking about hot sauce. And honestly, I thought they were talking about yesterday's lunch in the Mexican restaurant they went to. No, not quite. Turns out there's a company called Amadeus. Any of you who've ever worked in the travel industry will know the name. Amadeus has been around since the early days of airline reservation systems and now broadly involved in the travel industry and has been for a very long time. They have this database and application called Hot Sauce, which stands in this case for the Hotel Service Optimization System. So hot sauce was not necessarily related to lunch yesterday, but it's definitely related to data. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this data source, because this was pretty fascinating. And by the way, hot sauce is used not just by this company to run their theme parks, it's used by Marriott and many other chains. So it's a big player. Amadeus is a big player in hotel management.
Okay, so
this hot sauce database has a record in it every time someone touches a room. And by that, I mean obvious things like housekeeper logs in because he or she goes in to clean the room and then logs back out. It's obvious things like guest calls and says, it's too hot in here. Can somebody come fix my air conditioner? Or there's a water leak in the ceiling of the bathroom. Can somebody come take care of that? Those are obvious things, but it's even down to the level of a DoorDash driver arrives at the front desk and says, I have a delivery for Helmer's in room 327. That gets logged. So there are, over a course of time, millions of records for any given hotel, and somewhere between thousands and many thousands of records for any one room in any one hotel.
why are they tracking that level of data?
Why some of it I can't answer.
Like a
why,
DoorDash delivery, yeah.
Yeah, that seems to me to have somewhat less relevance than other entries in this database. You're going to see in just a second how many different kinds of data entries, however, were directly relevant for this project. So keep in mind, fairly large data source, and I don't I won't take the time now, but if there's time toward the end, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about how we actually worked with this data and how we got it into the Visio diagrams. But take it on faith for the moment that it existed out there in the cloud somewhere, and we then made it accessible within the Visio diagrams that contain the floor plans. The end result is something that looks like this. This is a Power BI report with a bunch of different components, the main one of which, for our purposes today, is this thing called the Visio visual. In Power BI, if you want to add a new visual to a report, those of you who are Power BI users, you know, you go over and you click on the little icon to drag in a bar chart or whatever else you'd like. If you want to add the Visio visual, it's not there by default, but if you click the button to look for additional visuals and just type Visio as a search, you will find it. It's available from Microsoft for free. And once you add it to your available visuals, you can click the button and drag a rectangle onto the page into which you will then put a Visio diagram. And again, for purposes of today, I'm not going to go into the details of specifically how you connect to a Visio diagram, but it works fairly straightforward. The means is quite straightforward, and the result can look like this. And again, this happens to be a floor plan, but it doesn't need to be. It can be any Visio diagram, network diagram, org chart, anything else that you do in Visio can be here in your Power BI report. And as before, rather than make you look at a static image, let's go do this live. Let me go to, not this page, this one. So here is our starting point for eventually looking at the hotel data. A very minimal but important requirement was we want these Power BI reports to be accessible to the housekeeping supervisors and the engineers, as we already know, but we also want management to be able to get to them. And the easiest way, if there are any managers in the room, I'm not demeaning you or your position here when I say, the easiest way to help the managers navigate to the data is give them pictures. So in the real Power BI report that this is a copy of, these were actually park logos whose names you would recognize. I've replaced everything with generic pictures and generic names to protect the innocent. So let's say I'm Joe Executive and I want to click on this because this is the park I want to explore. That brings up a map of the park, and I'm now looking at the resorts that are in this park. And by the way, this is exactly what I built for them, but just changed the names. So here we are. Let's take a look at Resort A. So I click, and this is standard Power BI drill through from page to page at this point. Now we see an actual map, this particular resort in this particular park. And there are 5 hotels here. Let's take a look at Hotel 1. So another page of drill down. And now we're at a point where we need to get specific. If I know exactly which floor of which hotel I want to go to, I can click the floor and click the button that says go to selected floor. But I did something else here. I made the background map clickable also. And it will take us to a general view of this hotel and all the floors and all the buildings. So it's sort of a visual table of contents. So watch what happens here. I click, and that's actually one Power BI report that is linked to a second one, and that's this one. And here is that visual table of contents. How did we create this? Each page in a Visio diagram has one floor of this resort hotel. And remember, this hotel is a collection of 5 buildings. So you see those 5 buildings arrayed here on the page. I wrote a little bit of VBA code. One of the things I automated, so I didn't have to do it by hand, was code that went through this multi-page diagram and made a PNG image of each floor, from one PNG for each page, each floor in the report, and then dropped all those images into a folder. And then I just pasted those images or inserted those images into this page of the Power BI report. And, I had code that rotated them slightly and did some other things too to make it more usable. And then ultimately, each of these is hyperlinked. So now if I know this is the hotel I wanted, but I hadn't been sure which floor it was I needed to see in which building, now I can say, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure it's building 2, floor 2. So let's take a look at that. So click, drill through, and now we're at the point where we really care about. Now we're looking at that Visio visual live in the corner of this particular Power BI report. And it's loading somewhat slowly. There should be room outlines that will appear here. There we go. I don't know what that delay was about, but as you can see, we have a floor and we have a map of that floor and we have a bunch of data about that floor that's represented by these various slicers and other views. There's also a date selector down here, a date and time selector. By the way, there is a standard time slicer that is built into Power BI. I used that initially. I ended up looking for another one that I thought might provide more detail, and I found this one, Para Timeline, I believe is the name of it. If you search for time slicer in the Power BI store, you'll find it. But I liked it because it had buttons to make it easy to go this year, last year, this month, last month. The slicing was a little bit more convenient here than in the default one. So other than that, what do we have here? Well, we have the chiclet slicer here so that we can say, this is housekeeping data. What does engineering data look like? We'll come back to that in a moment, but let's stick with housekeeping for the time being. There are some measures that they wanted to know about here. They might want to say, okay, let's just look at all the issues that have to do with custodians or all the issues that have to do with by the way, this is the trade that was involved when the issue was generated. This is the trade that was involved when the issue was resolved. So you can see that most issues are resolved by somebody related to housekeeping. But even more to the point, for me, the value was this issue slicer right here. So for the current time period, which happens to be 1 week toward the end of 2023, what can we learn? What insights can we gain from this data? Let's say I'm a housekeeping supervisor. I see that there's an item here, housekeeper sent back to room. Well, as a supervisor, that's interesting to me. So you notice as soon as I click, the diagram filters as well. And by the way, I can click on a room in the diagram, and that will cause everything else to filter too. So all these slicers and all these visuals are tied together by the underlying data, the hot sauce data. So I'm a housekeeping supervisor. I look at this and I say, wow, there are 4 rooms over on this wing during this week that a housekeeper had to be sent back. What's up with this housekeeper? Would be a logical question, right? So what insight can I gain from this view of this data? And by the way, could I have learned this by going back and looking through PDF reports of hot sauce data? Yeah, probably. But I'm a visual kind of person, and I suspect many of you are as well. This tells me so much. So my first question is, well, that's this week. What about last week? So handy time slicer. Nothing. Nobody was sent back that last week. How about the week before that? A couple in that corner. Still that left side of the building. Let me go back to the current week. So basically, it's given me some information so I can perhaps take action. I can go check with that housekeeper to find out what was going on. Honestly, it could just be a couple of crabby guests who just were fussy and picky and kept asking for the housekeeper to come back. Could be. Or it could be that the housekeeper did a lousy job, but that's part of my job as supervisor to figure that out. And now I have the means to get at a whole lot more information in context than I had before.
Scott, question.
Yes.
This is in the Visio client. Is this available in the Visio browser?
Yes, and actually this is, at this point, we are viewing this via Power BI. So this is a published Power BI report. The Visio diagram was stored in OneDrive or wherever it was convenient to put it, OneDrive or SharePoint. But we are not using Visio directly at this point. This is a published Power BI report. Does that clarify?
Yeah. So what licenses? Is this P1 or P2 that we're looking at?
Good question, and I can't answer that. I'm not a licensing guy at all. So I will tell you that, let me go back to the browser here. I will tell you that this is, this is my browser tab view of the published report. My vague recollection is it's oh, and sorry, P1 and P2, if you're referring to Visio Plan 1, Visio Plan 2. To do what I needed to do to create the Visio diagram, I actually used the desktop piece of Visio Plan 2. So to create the floor plans, the most efficient way to do it was in the desktop version of Visio. At this point, however, Visio licenses are not particularly relevant because all I'm doing is viewing that diagram in the visual, and anybody can do that. The Power BI license is the question I can't answer.
Right, right.
So back to the full screen mode here. Let's do it this way. So what else might I learn from this diagram? Well, let's go back to that engineering view. So I've turned off housekeeping. I'm looking at engineering, and I see a bunch of different engineering issues here. Let's say I am the plumber and I see shower, broken parts. So I see two rooms over here that have a shower issue. Are they completely independent of each other? Is it just a broken faucet, or is there a connection between the two? For example, is there something in one shower that's causing a leak in the plumbing that's affecting another room? Now, if these rooms were adjacent to each other, I might be more suspicious of that, a little bit less so in this particular case. But what's interesting to me as a plumber is I've got a plumbing issue on this floor. I want to know whether it's also a horizontal issue affecting other rooms. But if you're a plumber and you care, you want to know what's going on above and below, right? So here I am. I'm on building 2, floor 2, one click, and I'm now looking at the floor plan for the floor below. So I can see, and by the way, the reports are set up so whatever I've filtered, it's passed whenever I change pages. So the shower broken part filter is still applied here, and I can see I do not have a problem on that floor. So frankly, I'm a lot less concerned. I think that when I go back to the floor where the issue is, that it's pretty contained. Now, if I really wanted to, I could check the floor above to see whether there's something up there that's leaking down. But for right now, I'm pretty comfortable with what I know. As usual here, I've got the time slicer available so I can check, oh, good, this is a new problem. It's not something that's been lingering from last week or the week before, or I can check the current month and see whether this is a lingering problem. So I've got lots of different ways to slice here. Questions?
Okay, any further questions? You didn't mention the back-end data here, like you're connecting to someone mentioned this in the previous one, which I did skip. Okay. Whoops. Where's the data? Is this all in some kind of Azure database, a SQL database in Azure?
Yeah, let me talk about that a little bit. So the Amadeus data, the contract between this company, my client, and Amadeus was such that they got a once a day download, 4 a.m. download of the data from Amadeus. And my client stored that data in the cloud database. That name is escaping me at the moment.
Snowflake.
Snowflake. Thank you. Yeah. I'm the snowflake here in this case, or my memory is. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, they downloaded that data every day at 4 a.m. and stuffed it into a Snowflake database. So what we needed to do was connect Power BI to Snowflake. And it turns out that's pretty easy to do. And we, because there are connectors in Power BI for all kinds of things, including Snowflake. So we ended up doing that connection via Power BI. So from the Visio standpoint, I actually didn't have to care because as soon as I drop this Visio visual into Power BI, if I have a unique ID for every room that matches the unique ID for every room in the Snowflake database, I'm golden. All I need to do then is set up the color by value, as it's referred to, the color scheme in Power BI. And again, today's session wasn't about how to build this Power BI report as much as it was about the end result. Another time, I'd be happy to go into the details about how you actually build this report. But for the simple version right now, the Visio diagram had unique IDs for each room. So does the database. As soon as I drop the Visio visual into the report, I mean, it's literally this easy. The fact that the unique identifier exists in both places links them together.
Right.
For me, that's great news because I'm actually not much of a database person. So the fact that I didn't have to worry about doing the things in my Visio diagram to connect to external data sources made it trivially easy. All I had to worry about was what slicers and other visuals made sense to the client. Oh, and there is one visual I forgot to talk about, but I'll do that in a moment. Any other data related comments or questions, Peter?
No, not that I can see
Okay.
so far.
So let me reset. Oh, and by the way, I should mention this little tiny map that's down in the corner here. The idea with this map was to make it easy for them to get back to the resort level. So if I click that, I won't bother, but if I click that, it will take me back to the other Power BI report where I have the map of the resort, and I can click into different hotels and so forth. So we wanted to make it easy to get to navigate in multiple directions. Let me click on a room, and I'll take 2214 here. So notice that when I click on the room, Visio automatically zooms the visual in, and that, as I had commented earlier, automatically sets the filters and slicers over here. So now we see the selected room is 2214, and the issue count, let me go back, which was 127 for all the rooms on the floor, the issue count is 4 for this particular room. Now, you might also notice that I've got this issue count by room number thing down here. It's a type of chart, a scatter plot that is usually used looking for trends in data so we can see how our data is trending. But in this particular case, it's got really big circles on it, atypical, they're usually very small, and I'm not using it for that purpose at all. This is a workaround. What I really want when I click on a room is to be able to then, in Power BI, typically you can right click and drill through to more detail about that thing. The Visio visual at the moment doesn't happen to support drill through. So I needed a way for people, and again, picture people walking around with a Surface Pro tablet. I needed a way for them to be able to drill through. Scatter plots, it turns out, have that capability. And the dot is big because Surface Pro, fingertip. And when you are using a touchscreen, the right-click equivalent is tap and hold. So I wanted a big dot that somebody could tap and hold in order to do this, the equivalent of what I'm doing with my mouse, which is right-click, drill through to the room detail. I have another page set up in this report that provides that room detail. And we see a more granular level of detail about this room now, including how long it took to fix, on average, each of the issues associated with this room. We see people's names for the first time. You'll be happy to know that all 382,000 people that work for this company are named Smith. Again, part of my genericizing of their data. But it allows me to see exactly what did Marilyn do and how long did it take her to do it? Or what did Valande do and how long did it take him or her to do that? So this is that room level of detail that we don't care about often, but sometimes we do, and we want it to be a click away. The navigation here takes me back to wherever I want to go. I can go back to the same floor, which is what I'll do, or I can go back to a different floor. We came from building 2, floor 2, and now we're back. Yeah, I think that's about it.
That's it. So, okay.
I've got a couple more slides just to wrap up because I do have some information I promised, and I want to present that here. This is all in the PDF, so I'll put that QR code up one more time so you can download the PDF and enter the contest. But there are some blogs and useful information published by Microsoft. There is specific information about the Power BI and Visio visual combination. Those are the middle pair of links there. One of the other Visio MVPs, in fact, Peter and I were just on a call with David Parker an hour or two ago. David Parker in the UK was among the 6 of us Visio MVPs. He was the one who jumped on the Visio visual in Power BI with both feet right when it first appeared. And he's got some really, really good examples that are available online. So not only is this, I've got a Power BI report with a floor plan in it. He's got one that has both a floor plan and an organization chart, so you can navigate around and see who's where within the organization and physically where they sit within the building. His blog is great, all kinds of great technical details about what to do with Visio in creative ways. I didn't mention it at the time, but if you think back to this particular diagram, bear with me one sec, it was the theme park navigation map. This color palette that I chose here, these colors were very deliberately chosen for accessibility. And what I did was use a page at Adobe, the Adobe website, for generating color palettes that are accessible by people with the three primary forms of color blindness. So that palette that I chose was specifically designed to be visible to people with normal vision, and also that the colors on the buildings were equally visible to people with the three primary kinds of color blindness. I'd encourage you to go to this page and take a look at it. It's kind of fun to play with just by itself, but it serves a really, really important purpose.
Scott, very quickly,
Yes.
so the room number is the only link between the Visio diagram and the snowflake data set. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's partly because the room number, it's sort of a fully qualified room number. So it includes the room number and the building information all in one ID.
Perfect.
Yes, good point. This is my LinkedIn profile, QR code one more time in the upper right, some information about courses I have available at LinkedIn Learning. Though top two there, working with data and Visio tips and tricks, I just redid those. So they've been updated as within the last couple of weeks. The one at the bottom, Learning Visio for the Web, I'm in the process of finishing the scripting for that, and I'm going to be re-recording that course entirely in the middle of September. Other information there as well. And here's the QR code for downloading the PDF and entering the contest. And that's it. I've got one more slide here that I'll put up now and then go back to the QR code. Actually, the same QR code is right here. Contact information. I said I'd give you my email. If you have questions after the fact, feel free.
Very cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott. And we'll send an email out with some of these links and a link to the presentation and the slides. And also, like SharePoint, Soho does a number of Visio training classes, might I just add, which I'll put in the chat and I'll send you an email as well. Okay, thank you, Scott, very much. Very educational and entertaining. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
Feel free, everybody, if you do want to get in touch with me afterwards, I'm serious about that. Please feel free.